Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. David Augustin Hodge Sr. David is fine. Feel free to call me David. We are coming to you live and direct from the National Center of Research and National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare at Tuskegee University. This is the final day of our PHEI, which is the fourth day of our entire commemoration program. We still have one more day to go. Tomorrow, where we have a noon banquet, where our guest speaker will be Judge Dr. Lucinia Dunn, and she is an amazing speaker, amazing presenter. The first time she and I spoke, just chopping it up a little bit, it went on for hours. I mean, I think I talked from Atlanta, from Tuskegee to Atlanta, just talking about where the bodies are buried in Tuskegee, how things have worked. Because she was at one point, she's still Mayor Dunn. She was the mayor of Tuskegee. So we are looking so forward to hearing her tomorrow. So please, please, please come on. We are I already said that we're the National Center. PHEI means Public Health Ethics Intensive. Back in 1997, President Bill Clinton made a national apology to the family and the men and the descendant family members of those 625 men and their families who were involved unwittingly, unbeknownst to them, in the in this unethical, unjust, so-called syphilis study. It was less of a study and more of an egregious, unethical non-treatment of the Negro male and men in Macon County. The fact that there were men who were untreated in the control group, and that those men had wives and girlfriends and others, that says to us that there was transference and continuous contracting of syphilis. When you look at the medical reports, we've been to the archives and we've read the medical reports, and it's interesting that the diagnosis that the men had for their syphilis and the way their bodies responded, the behaviors and the pains, the things that they went through, there were so many of their partners, their wives, who had similar responses, but they were not diagnosed because the women were not part of the study. Therefore, this commemoration marks the 51st year since the apology not the apology, since the ending, the so-called ending of the syphilis study, and the 26th year since the apology for the study. And so each year we come together in this commemoration event to make sure we remember the 625 men and their families. We are thankful to be enjoined each year, not just Tuskegee University and the National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare, but also with the descendant family members, particularly the Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation, which is with the president being our dear sister Lily Head. We are grateful for Monday, which was the day of healing for the family, and this is an opportunity for the family members to kind of come together and tell their stories. That was on Monday, and that was extremely powerful moment. At a certain point, I had to excuse myself because the intimacy. We have to be very sensitive and be concerned about the that setting, that intimate setting. They have been violated enough. The only persons who need to be in that room are the family members. So we Dr. Kraus, can you hold off just one moment? I'll bring you in shortly. It took off. It took over my session here. See something. I'll continue to talk as Brother Kraus gets ready. So, bring that down. Just stop sharing for a moment. Let me finish up this little beginning. So on Tuesday, when we officially began, the first persons that we had was Dr. Susan Reverby, historian, and she gave us reflection because she was part of the committee that brought about the National Center to Tuskegee. Amongst our own former director, past director, Dr. Reuben Warren. But she was on, and Dr. Warren was also present, which was great because then he could give us some insight and some conversation as to what took place in the last 26 years. Her interlocutor was Dr. Riggins Earl. Dr. Riggins Earl, who's a professor at Interdenominational Theological Center, an ethicist. So Dr. Rebbe was able to give the history, and Dr. Earl was able to give the ethics, and so that which we are struggling with to understand. Then we had, after that, our next guest was Dr. Keisha Ray, and Dr. Ray, who wrote a book called Black Health. She and I had a conversation about Black bioethics and what that means. And it's interesting, she and I had never met before except through emails and reading her work, but it's interesting that we are very similarly inclined as to what Black bioethics should entail. And on my version of Black bioethics is the word Blackness is more for protest language, a protest conversation, because Blackness has to do with with any group who has suffered the undercurrents, any group who's on the bottom, any group, like, whether, I don't care if it's women, is LGBTQIA, poor, Native American, people of color, brothers and sisters at the southern border, who every time I see images of them at the southern border, I never see someone carrying them water or food. So that's of a major concern. Brothers and sisters in the Palestinian region, brothers and sisters in Israel, brothers and sisters in Ukraine, brothers and sisters in Russia, wherever there exists human suffering, bioethics should have a conversation and should play a part. There's not to assert anything political, but more importantly, to say we are against death and dying. We are about human and humanity. So that was the gist of that first day. Then yesterday, the conversation continued into with Dr. Rebecca Brendel Weintraub from the Center for Bioethics at Harvard Medical School, and she did a fantastic presentation on mental health. She's the immediate past president of the American Psychiatric Association, and so she just did a spellbinding presentation. Her interlocutor was Mr. Sonny Etienne, and he's presented on mental health, and particularly with young people, and how young people struggle. And so much of a concern is how our young people struggle with mental health issues and what we can do to impact. Because the next iteration segued into Dr. Kathy McDuffie, and she presented on suicide prevention, which went right nicely with what was done by Dr. Brendel and Mr. Sonny Etienne. As a matter of fact, today we just got back from presenting where Mr. Etienne presented at Tuskegee Institute Middle School, the middle school students on the topic of basically mental health and what they need to do to understand who they are and what they need to do to overcome some of the things that they're going through. So we just came up from that. So yesterday afternoon, we ended with this very vigorous conversation with Dr. Kathy McDuffie and Mr. Sonny Etienne sitting on the sidelines having this conversation as well. Today, our conversation begins a little late, but we have time. The conversation begins first with Dr. Louis Kraus. Dr. Kraus and I spoke actually one time, and we were dealing with a particular matter, and he was so amazingly helpful to me. But what makes us family related is that he was recommended to me by Dr. Rebecca Brendel Weintraub, who is my sister. That is my sister, my love. And she said that this is her mentor. And the way she spoke about him, I just got excited. And when we had to have a conversation on autism, no one better than Dr. Kraus. So we are excited to have him here today. And the person who will serve as the bioethics honors student who will serve as our host and who's going to introduce Dr. Kraus and who's going to introduce our second speaker as also our Descendant family testimonials will be Jonathan David Hodge. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he's related to me. So do we have Jonathan take it away and introduce to us Dr. Louis Kraus?
Okay. Louis J. Kraus, MD, is the Professor and Chief of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in the Department of Psychiatry at Rush University Medical Center. He is the founding director of the Autism Assessment Research, Treatment and Service Center, AARTS Center. He received his MD in 1987 from Chicago Medical School and completed his residency at Northwestern University and fellowship training in child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of Chicago, where he served as the director of child and adolescent forensic psychiatry, the assistant director of inpatient psychiatry, and was an assistant professor. From there, Kraus and appointment of assistant professor at Northwestern University and was chief of child adolescent psychiatry for North Shore University Health Services. He arrived at Rush University Medical Center in 2002 as an associate professor and as the Women's Board Chief of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry.
Okay. Thank you very much. Most of my work is dealing with advocacy. I started what is now a large autism program at Rush on the west side of Chicago, and dealing with the focus for me was working with a population that was not getting served, or at least not served very well. The program has grown such that people come from all around, but we have really special programming for to get people in on the west side. I also work at a therapeutic day school through Easter Seals on the west side of Chicago, where I refer the kids over to Rush for treatment. Otherwise, the reality is that parents are massively confused in regards to trying to get into programs, often not having the ability. I'm going to talk about this in the talk, but access to services for so many parents that are children of color, Black, Hispanic kids, incredibly difficult. Lower socioeconomic families struggle. You know, the reality is that working with kids with autism, it's hard enough for even family of means to get in for services. But families without, there's almost nothing available. They're lucky if they can go to their local community mental health center, have somebody without any experience, at least trying to help out. School systems as well will not openly describe a lot of services for them. And what I've tried to do in the programming that I've set up is to, as best I can, to improve this process. Let me move ahead here. Okay, so this is a brief summary of what we're going to talk about today. Now, any one of these topics could easily be, a day presentation. So it's just going to be some summaries, and hopefully, if there are questions, I would be glad to answer them. But access to care predictive testing, which is, you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment with that. Medical and psychiatric treatment, educational eligibility, a huge issue. Because this is not only where kids can get the help that they need, but if they need more therapeutic placements, this is most likely where that's going to come from. And most parents have no idea how to access these services. One of the things we do that I've done at Rush is we've connected with one of the local law schools at Loyola. And they have, through their law clinic, they will offer free legal services to kids to help them in the school. Which I've got to tell you, in particular with Chicago public school system, this has been a huge surprise to them. I think they have me on a dartboard. But anyways, then we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of empathy with children with autism versus, like, say, a conduct disorder teen. And then, as I was just mentioning, a little bit about the school systems regarding placement. All right. So just a little background. I'm sure you've heard, the incidence of autism has gone up quite a bit. 1 in 44 boys, 1 in 100 girls. I think when I was in training, they were talking about 1 in 1,000. Now, there could be different reasons. There could be some type of environmental reason. It could be genetic loading. People that might have not married or had children now do for different reasons, increasing the genetic loading. The ability to assess those that have autism may also be the reason that, when we talk about Kanner in 1943, when he first diagnosed autism, by the way, people talked about autism for hundreds of years, but it's really Kanner who's credited. Hans Asperger came out right after him, diagnosed a similar but slightly different presentation, which was termed later as Asperger's, and used to be in the diagnostic manual, isn't anymore, and is inclusive in autism. But what we have now is a spectrum of disorders, which is why it's autism spectrum disorder. The lower functioning kids, the kids that have moderate intellectual impairment and other struggles are on one end, and the higher end are kids that have no increased risk for medical problems, no increased risk for intellectual impairment, but they struggle. They struggle emotionally. They struggle in regards to reciprocal social interactions, and they struggle in many, even though they can be quite bright, seem to be relatively normal. When you see them compared to other teens, they just present a little bit differently. And some still feel this is really a different disorder, but it's all under the spectrum of autism. Hold on. So the diagnosis of autism has 3 components to it. One is that you have some type of language deficit. Now, in classic autism, it was significant. Essentially, there was minimal language or severely impaired reciprocal and expressive language. When we look at the higher functioning kids with autism, teens with autism, you're looking at subtle pragmatic or social language problems. So that, basically, when you see these kids, you might look at them and go, they are really endearing. They are lovely. But when they are with their peers, you notice a difference. And language is crucial in regards to growth, development, communication, social interactions, things like that. Then along with that, you have deficits in reciprocal social interactions. Now, diagnostically, it can be difficult. So if you have a high functioning child who has deficits in language, they could have deficits and problems in regards to interaction socially. And they have another diagnosis, if this wasn't enough, called a social pragmatic language disorder. And that sometimes fits in. Now, what will not be in that is the third criteria, and that is some type of rigid stereotypic behaviors. Now, with the lower functioning kids, it's kind of, they might pick up, say, a toy phone and just clang it up and down. With the higher functioning kids, they may have certain clothes that they want to wear, certain places that they like to keep things in their room or on their desk in school. I remember seeing a kid, they couldn't understand why the child was exploding in school. They liked their pencil on the left side of their desk, and there was this joker of a student that would put the pencil on the right side of the desk and the kid would explode. And they until they saw that, they didn't realize it, but it can be as subtle as that. And often when kids explode, when there are behavioral difficulties, it's mostly due to anxiety. It's not, it's often when I come to a school for an evaluation, they're identifying, the behaviors are terrible, but they don't look at what the precipitant, what the etiology is to those behaviors. So those are the three major components to autism. And I can't emphasize enough the variation, and they're all tough. The higher functioning, the better kids can do, but there are all kinds of problems that can develop with that, and that sometimes these kids sometimes can be remarkably successful, and other times really, really struggle. Okay, so access to care. Kids on the west side of Chicago often don't have regular pediatricians to go to. They'll go to a community mental health center. When you look at their school physical, it's often not done by anyone they see routinely, and each year it's different. It's somebody else. So these people are not, one of the wonderful things about having a regular pediatrician is that many of them now have some kind of autism screening that they do, because the earlier the intervention, the better off the child can be. But for many kids that we see that are not of means, it's missing. And with that, what is missing is any kind of early intervention. For adults, you're now living independently if you can, and you think that's great. Well, good luck trying to, for you that might have college-age kids, trying to get them to make their dental appointment or their doctor's appointment, you're jumping on top of them. You take a child with high-functioning autism, and they're never going to be making that appointment. That you're going to end up having to do it. But as a result, they often miss those appointments, and they don't get the type of treatment that they need. These kids, even though they have trouble expressing themselves, when you do talk to them, when they can communicate, they talk about not feeling understood by their doctor. And so it limits what they tell the doctor. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but one of the problems is they miss things. And so these kids have medical and mental health presentations that are often missed by their pediatrician. Sitting in the waiting room is a huge problem. When we first built our waiting room at Rush, I begged them to have a separate area for these kids. And they didn't do it. They said it was going to cost too much. There'll be one area and they'll put some chairs to the side. So now they're commenting. They go, why didn't, it's years later, it's 10 years later, 12 years later, different upper administration. And they're asking me why I didn't build a second waiting room area because of the struggles. What happens is the kids get frightened and they act up a bit. And nothing more or less than that. But it is a struggle in the waiting room. People, so often what you'll see is parents will keep their kids outside. They'll keep them in the car. They'll try to avoid having other contact so that they don't get agitated, so they're not asked to leave. So security isn't brought in, which makes everything worse. Look, the available services are limited. Getting services, when I built the arts program, by the way, it was originally just going to be ARTS, and then I got people threatening to sue me because there were so many programs called arts. So it became the Autism Assessment Treatment Program. But I built it in part because of a wonderful family that commented that even because of with all of their means, they had trouble finding services. But there are every city, limited services, in particular those without means. A lot of places, it's fee for, you want the good people, it's fee for service. Or at least you need to have really good insurance. Public aid is limited. You go to some of the other hospitals in Chicago, they'll tell you it's a year-long wait list. And then they wait the year and they tell them they've lost their name, and it all starts over again. So it really is a problematic thing. And you know, for myself, even just doing something individually, it makes a difference. Like I said, the wait lists are excruciating, and so that we will do everything we can to minimize the wait lists and get kids in. When I built the program, initially there's a resource center. If you plug in arts and Rush, you'll see the program. But there was a comprehensive resource center for everything from haircuts to pediatricians to dentists that work with children with autism, and it became really successful. And then it was one of the biggest hits at Rush. And a couple of years later, this lovely family came back and said, "Time to do something bigger for the community." And that's when this program really built up. And I'm not a researcher; I'm an advocate. But I know how to build programs to develop. So our staff now, we have multiple R01 grants, national grants, and we built up a huge clinical program that is not just for children, but a lost group, young adults. If you think it's hard to find services for kids, young adults and adults, really difficult. Illinois in particular ranks at the very bottom of offering services. All right. Hold on, I got something here. Blocking. There we go. So, I've already brought some of this up, but the reality is that, autism has become much more popular. It's become much more mainstream. When I began medical school, I barely knew what autism was. I needed it explained to me. Now, grade school kids can tell you what autism is. There are huge disparities in regards to treatment. There's a lot more available for younger kids, school-age kids. You can stay in school until you're 22. I always tell parents, they're like, my child's going to graduate at 18. And I have to convince them not to let them graduate because they're going to get services through their school system well beyond what most communities can offer. And so you have to educate. And that's, as an advocate, that's what's missing with so many of these families is educating them. One of the things that Easter Seals did at this therapeutic day school, we're going to talk at the end about school placements and things. So this is a school just for kids with autism. Is we developed a wonderful meeting that I have with parents where we get the teachers, the occupational therapists, the speech therapists, the music therapists, the behavioralists, usually a couple other people thrown in there, including interpreters. And we get them all together, and I spend about an hour with them. And it always starts with, tell me about your child. And then we go around the room and they hear about how their child is doing at school. And then I look and I go, what do you need? How's your child doing? Behaviorally, are there any treatment approaches? Anything that they need. And probably about half of them, I set them up at Rush. And what I've learned is that, even if you're well-meaning, even if you have, what you think are good intake systems, people get lost in them. They call them up, they get a recording, they never hear back. They call back, they don't know what what they're asking for. They're often told, oh, we're full or we don't have time. That isn't the case. So what I do is I actually call the intake for them and get them an appointment. So I get them that initial intake at Rush, so at least they can start with some services. And we have different kinds of services. We have family work. We have group work with kids. We have sex education classes for higher functioning kids with autism because they don't get it in the school system. Not kids with autism. And it can be very helpful. And then, of course, psychiatric needs. We'll talk about that in a minute. Non-English speaking Latino families. This was amazing. More than 85% of them with children with autism really don't know anything about what to do and how to get services for their kids. And the reality is most minorities have difficulty accessing services. I did a study early on, one of the few studies I've done, and interestingly, one of the groups were the we have a large Chinatown and Chinese population in Chicago, and that is one of the groups that are least likely to access services for their child that has autism. They as a group, they tend to more minimize mental health and developmental issues, but all minorities. But I will tell you the groups in at Easter Seals, the families that are there are just absolutely incredible. Give me just 1 second. Yeah, one other thing. So a lot of the families that I see, they're reaching for things. And whenever that happens, when you have a significant developmental delay or problem, there's always someone to take advantage of you. So you got these sort of hokey types of treatments that probably have no benefit. Some can be devastating. Some children with autism have died from things like intravenous chelation. But other types of treatment that can be very expensive, like hyperbaric oxygen chambers, nothing to show it's helpful. I've looked at the pamphlets they have. It'll reset the brain. Don't even know what they're talking about. But then there are treatments that are not going to cause harm. And I always reassure parents, if you want to try something like that, that's fine. So, for example, lactose and gluten-free diets. Every once in a while, they put their child on it and the behaviors improve. So who am I to say don't try it? And there's nothing wrong with it. But here's the interesting part. Some of these kids, more than I would expect, these kids start to do better. And I've looked into it with them. And what it is it's so hard to have a lactose and gluten-free diet that the parents have to really structure their meals. And what you find out is the kids get really well-balanced meals to eat. And that, I think, probably has more of an impact on how they're doing than anything else. But I don't want to minimize those trials. So there are unhealthy things. Should not do it without any kind of research. But there are some that are risk-free, that are fine, and let them, and I encourage them if they want to try it, but they should understand there's no real research behind it. Hold on. Uh-oh. Trying to move to page 7. For some reason, this is not moving. Any idea how to move this? Shoot.
Is your assistant helping you, Dr. Kraus?
She wasn't. She was off. Let me see if I can find her. Hold on.
Stopping?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, she's on.
Calling Lizzie.
Give me 1 moment. I'm sorry. Hey there. I don't know what happened. Yes. Oh, there we go. Got it. Thank you. Bye. She's good. Okay. All right. Predictive testing. So as I was mentioning before, some wonderful things that many pediatricians do in regards to early intervention and taking a look at testing children with autism. The problem is, a lot of community mental health centers and other places don't offer these services. And in any area of medicine, the earlier the intervention, the better off you're going to be. When you have that lump, that pain, that anything, the earlier you get that seen, the better off you're going to be. The earlier you're diagnosed and treatment starts, the better off you're going to be, no matter what level you're at. And that part is great. Now they're doing more and more genetic testing, what are called microsomal chromosomal assays. And these assays are great because it can tell you if there's a genetic loading, so that if you have other children without an autism spectrum disorder, they can at least get checked so they know what the risks are in having children. But what is not too far off is what you see with Down syndrome, with trisomy 21, where they do genetic intrauterine testing as a routine, and parents will decide whether they want to have the child or not. That's going to happen at some point with autism, and this will be obviously a decision the parents will have to make, but one that's complex. And not an easy one. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this as time moves on. Empathy. So I can't tell you how many times I get a call from a school to do an evaluation, and they say the child has no empathy. Is he conduct disordered? And I see the child. It's not that they don't have empathy. It's that they can't appreciate how somebody else might be feeling as we do. It's not that they can't feel. It's not that they are conduct disordered. It's not that they want to do something bad. And the difference is when you look at a conduct disordered adolescent or an antisocial personality disorder, they know what empathy is. They could care less about it. They don't care how other people feel. These kids don't understand it. And in legal systems and other places, this is a big differential in regards to people sort of understanding the behavior and understanding that things may occur without malice. All right. So medical and psychotropic medication management. I have had several families over my career that have castrated their young teenage girls. I don't even know how they find somebody to do this, but apparently they do. And they will say that it's because of dealing with menstruation. That's not the issue at hand. It's they're worried the child is going to get pregnant, and they don't want to have to deal with that. And it's and the child's young enough. It's just not the parent's decision to make, and it's done quietly, but it occurs. And really a terrible thing. My father was a psychiatrist, and he was once taking care of a child who is now 65 years old. But when she was a child, she's from a wealthy family in Chicago. He said, my father protected me, kept me in the house, always had a guard with me to make sure nobody would take advantage of me. And he always remembered that because she said, just once I wanted somebody to take advantage of me. But it was, she couldn't have her life. But what happens here is just, in my view, absolutely wrong. It reminds me a little bit about what Joe Kennedy did with his daughter when he lobotomized her at McLean Hospital. That same concept. Didn't want her to make the rest of the family look bad in her misbehaviors. Okay, so kids with low functioning autism have a higher risk for seizures, usually grand mal seizures. Variable percentages that come out, somewhere around maybe 20% of them. And sometimes they get better, sometimes they persist. They are usually not life-threatening, but very serious and sometimes tough to treat. Kids with higher functioning autism spectrum disorder, no increased risk for seizures. The next issue, metabolic syndrome. Some of these kids are on, some just have really bad eating habits, but some just are on medications that cause them to gain a lot of weight, cause their triglycerides to go up, their cholesterol to go up, can cause their blood sugar to go up, develop diabetes. All things that need to be looked at closely. Cannot tell you how many kids I see where it's not looked at all. The reality is, some kids with autism, it's really hard to get a blood draw to see what's going on. Well, there are a lot of places where they can do kind of what's called a twilight anesthesia. So you can get the blood work, so you can follow up, so you can see, and they can get reasonable medical care. We're not even talking about the high, just reasonable medical care. Something that is often missed, but one of the leading causes of death for children with autism is drowning. And every parent I have, and this is one thing I can get on the west side of Chicago, the YMCA, there are all kinds of places they can get swim lessons. Teach your child to keep that head above water. And the earlier you can do it, the better off they're going to be. In general, with all, there are a slew of different medical issues, but a lot of it comes down to just poor follow-up and poor treatment. Average life expectancy of a child with autism is 39. A lot of people don't realize how young it is. So when you think, and it absolutely could be longer than that. Psychotropic medications for kids. The biggest issue with treatment is behavioral issues. And as I said, a lot of times the behavioral issues are because of anxiety. And you've got to find a way. Now, these are medications that are also used for psychosis, but they're both FDA approved for autism. Now, when you treat autism, you don't treat autism. You treat whatever they're presenting with. If they have a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, yes, okay, comorbidities, you have to treat that. And you have to understand, you have to be able to look for it. And the problem, again, a lot of these families, on the west side of Chicago, they don't get into specialists. They don't get into people that know how to look for these subtle presentations, mood symptoms, anxiety symptoms. Much higher incidence of ADHD, so they'll tend to be impulsive. If you find the right interventions for them, it can really make a huge difference in regards to helping them out. All right, I put one word here. My wife looked this thing over before I put it together, and she goes, "Brutal, why did you only put one word?" I go, no, I put a greater than sign there next to it because I didn't want you to forget. ABA therapy used aversive treatment, classic ABA that was started by Lovaas. So they would punish kids. Now, one thing we've learned in research is that coercive behavior, coercive treatment for behavior disorders is not effective in the long run. And so, interestingly, even though ABA therapy is so popular in regards to a use for kids, the earlier type of ABA was not just not helpful, but potentially dangerous to the child, and certainly a punishment that bordered abusive. The newer type of ABA has taken out a lot of the coercive interventions, the punishments that would entail. Well, it was just the classic ABA was just a very bad process. And what I want to emphasize is that, people were doing whatever they could to control behavior. And it didn't matter how it might be affecting the child. And it's still with a lot of interventions with families, with children with autism, you say, for whose benefit? Okay. So education. For many families, especially families with higher functioning children with autism, it's hard to get a school system to have an eligibility of autism. In special education, there are 13 different special education eligibilities. There's things like intellectual impairment, learning disabilities, health impaired, other health impaired, which is where ADHD falls. Autism has its own eligibility. And if you get that eligibility, there are all kinds of services that open up, and the school is held responsible to do it. Occupational therapy, helping with sensory issues, speech and language, social issues. One of the struggles, particularly with high functioning kids with autism, they have a rigid way of looking at the world. They expect it to be the way they see it, and they don't see the world as changing to help them, they only see the world as changing to benefit them. And what the schools have to do is to teach them that they have to modify their own expectations. Sometimes they put it under a global thing of executive functioning or something like that, but it's more complicated than that. It's one of the toughest things, but a doable thing to be able to work with kids. Now, this is a real issue. I'm putting up two hands because on the one hand, if you have a child that might have autism, but maybe they have social anxiety and ADHD, and maybe they don't have autism, but they need to get services. So the doctor says, he doesn't quite meet the criteria, but let's give him an eligibility of autism so they can get the services that they want. And everybody, this third grade child, everybody's enthusiastic. Child's getting wonderful services. Now the child's in 7th or 8th grade, and they identify themselves as having autism. They justify their behaviors as having autism, and lo and behold, they don't. And so now you have a whole new set of struggles because perhaps the eligibility that you gave them and the diagnosis to help them ends up limiting problems. So on the one hand, you get the benefits, but on the other hand, you get other developmental and problematic issues that can happen because of a diagnosis that maybe shouldn't have been made. But it is a bit of a dilemma. Doctors tend to want to get the services. Just to point out, the eligibility for autism in school systems, and this is federal, is different than the diagnostic manual. Not terribly different, but it's different. They have a series of about a dozen different things that you fill out, and it's just slightly different. All right, we're getting near the end here. Focus should not be on the diagnosis, it should be on the deficits. In an IEP, when they write it up, there are goals. Parents will go in there naively, not knowing what to ask the school, even being fearful. These are intimidating meetings, and they can be fearful of what to ask the school district. If there is a way to get an advocate in there, if I can get a resident or one of my fellows to school with a family, I do, because they often need help. Now, if nothing is possible, I at least write things out for them so they know the questions to ask and to make sure that the goals that they need in school are properly identified. I just threw in one just so you can get toileting. So for the lower functioning kids, toileting is a huge issue. As they get older, to get into vocational programs and things like that, you have to be toilet trained in almost all of them. And it's amazing how schools will not do anything. They'll require the parents to have the kids in pull-ups instead of working on toilet training. And then they'll say that they don't have the staff. Not having the staff is not an excuse. They have to meet the basic educational needs, and that's a deficit. That's a crucial thing to be able to learn. And they may not like it, but it's something that's incredibly important. And I can't emphasize enough the naivety that so many families will have, and ones that have the least amount of education on the topic will have the least to know about what to do in a school individual education plan special ed meeting. Just want to bring this issue up, informed consent and competency. Autism itself is not a reason to not allow a child to have informed consent or to be competent. Informed consent is usually more relative to the intellectual impairment, not to a diagnosis of autism. And competency is context defined. It's the situation at hand that is identified. And ultimately, you may write something where you think it's a competency issue, but it's a decision that has to be made by a judge. And it is can be a problematic issue because a lot of times parents don't want to take on that responsibility. So it does take a lot of working and a lot of teaching. Okay, last major issue. So the most minimal type of interventions is full inclusion. It's where you offer some services, maybe some pull-out services from their mainstream classroom. The benefit of full inclusion is they're with developmentally healthy kids. They can do activities that they might enjoy. If they don't have an intellectual impairment, they can, work in a regular school environment. If that doesn't work, the next more restrictive environment is a self-contained classroom, usually in their home school. Sometimes a district might have one in a school that might be different than their school, but it's, they often will still be able to do some activities mainstream. The next most restrictive is a therapeutic day school. I talked to you a little bit about Easter seals, and these are ones that are typically in their community, typically within 1 hour. A school has to provide transportation as part of this. It's a federal law. I always like to remind people that anything educational at the end of the day is federal. And it's not community, it's not state, it's not your community courts, it's federal. So if there ends up being a big problem, it ends up in federal court. The most restrictive alternative for kids is residential placement. Now, residential placement could cost anywhere from probably $100,000 to $300,000 a year for a child with autism. Often the state, through Medicaid funding, will pay for this. But it takes an effort. It often takes a team of people to get it. It can take attorneys to get it. It can take experts to go in there. Schools will often be resistant to wanting to offer these services. When the services are needed, it is by far the best option and where a child can get the best services. The reason they're so expensive is because of all the services that are provided to these kids. Who gets the services most likely? The wealthiest, the people that can afford all those things I just described, that can go in with attorneys. So in these programs, in these autism programs, when you have a patient with autism, you have to have some common sense when you're treating them. You have to realize that they're not going to know how to fight for these services, and they're going to need assistance. And as a physician or a treater, you have to try to at least do your best to help them to get the services that they need. Otherwise, they won't, and it's really a terrible process. That's it. Thank you.
Dr. Kraus, thank you so much. I was writing some stuff. I don't have access to ask questions, so I posted my stuff in the chat room. But I don't want you to answer them now because what we have here is Dr. Dixon Christian, who has sons who are autistic, and therefore to give our audience another side of how this thing plays out, as well as the Mr. and Mrs. Green, who are descendant family members, and they will be reflecting in a similar way. So if they would come on screen now, that'd be very helpful. So if you could stop sharing, and then please, and then Jonathan,
yes.
And then Jonathan will read the bio for Dr. Christian. But I do want to say,
thank you all.
Yeah, I do want to say that, but so please stick around. I'm going to answer the questions when they're finished. Ask the questions when they're finished. And please, I'm asking people to post your question in the Q&A because it's it's uh, the stuff that some of the stuff that you said, and we'll get to it later in terms like the ethics seems self-evident with respect to service for these young people and just any person who's autistic. But we'll get to that in a moment. So Jonathan, please read the please read. I think somebody needs to go on silent, go on mute. So we're getting a feedback. And Jonathan, please read the introduce Dr. Christian.
Okay. Dixon L. Christian is a retired USAF physician who currently resides in San Antonio, Texas. He obtained his Bachelor's of Science in Biology at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, his Doctor's of Medicine from Howard University, and a residency in family medicine at Michigan State University. During his time in the USAF, Dr. Christian has served as a family medicine physician and aerospace medicine physician with F-16s and F-15s fighter jets. He has held various positions, including Element Chief, Flight Commander, Chief of the Medical Staff, Director of Outpatient Services, and Chief of Aerospace Medicine. He now serves as financial advisor and medical insurance specialist. He has 4 children and enjoys hiking and biking.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that gracious introduction. Before I begin, David, would you be so kind, Dr. Hodge, to grant me administrative privileges so I may share my slide?
You should have that. Do you not have share screen on the bottom?
No, I do not.
Okay, let me see. All right, let me see what's going on. Go ahead and talk, Dr. Christian.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Dr. Kraus, for an excellent presentation. This is indeed a difficult topic to tackle, and it's like every bullet that I saw you brought up could have been its own discussion. Autism is a difficult one to tackle indeed. I recall when I was in medical school and just heard about autism, the rate of autism has been steadily climbing to the current levels that we see today. When I was a medical student, the rate was 1 in 166. By the time I was midway through my career in the Air Force, that rate had risen to 1 in 60 among military members. And so, you know, the rates keep marching up and up and up. And it's still unclear as to why it is that way in particular. Is it a case of us just becoming more adept to diagnosing this entity, recognizing it, or is it because that public awareness has grown increasingly so, and therefore those concerns are being brought by patients about their children? So here we go. I'll just start talking from my slides until David, if you have a solution, just jump in and let me know. For some reason, I'm unable to share.
Did you? I think I corrected that. I made you co-host.
Okay, and
try toggling your mouse at the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen.
Okay, let me expand this a little bit more.
And just toggle. It'll disappear, but if you toggle it down, it pops up. It should pop up.
Okay.
Look for the green box that says share screen.
I do not see that on this particular one. I'm not sure why. Oh boy. Let's see. Camera background. Video setting. Statistics.
Okay, I tell you what, just go ahead and read off this read off for them. I'll see if I could open it on my side. I'll try again. Let me put it up.
Okay. And so let me toggle to my screen. I'm working from a Mac, if that helps at all. That creates a whole different
That's what it is.
ball of wax.
That's what it is. You need Microsoft. That's what it is. All right. Now we understand the problem. Okay.
All righty. And so I'll go ahead and read from my slides, and hopefully we can follow. My task today is to provide a testimony as to what it's like to have a child of a parent who happens to be a physician. And I tell you, it's been a journey within itself. Dr. Kraus did an excellent job in terms of presenting some of the risk factors that abounds when it comes to this disease process. And those include advanced parental age, or having a sibling with autism. Individuals with low birth weight are more likely to develop autism, and having a certain genetic condition such as Down syndrome or Fragile X. Those tend to create situations where autism will be more likely. So they say there's no testimony without a test. And I tell you, my test arrived on August 9th, 2002, and we called him Judah. And Judah was our first child of myself and my wife. And my wife, who's now ex-wife, we'll talk about that a bit later in other fashion, was a dentist. So Judah was born into a household of a physician and a dentist, and our lives were super busy. By the time we started out at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, and by the time Judah started aging and becoming of age, we were stationed at Lakenheath, RAF Lakenheath in London, England, or in Lakenheath, England, which is about 70 miles outside of London. And the first thing we noticed is that, there was something not quite right about my son. He's happy, he's jovial, but he tends to just engage in his own world. He didn't quite play with other kids. And we were like, why is that? And he wasn't forming words. And he was creeping until the age of 15 months. And we started saying, what's wrong with him? What's going on? So we go to the pediatrician and had him evaluated. And just at the time, based on just his ability to do eye contact, the pediatrician said, nah, he doesn't have autism. Well, we continue to notice some things. One, we took him to Belgium to visit a friend, and the friend of mine had a son that was Judah's age. And Judah looked at the boy and noticed that he's walking around at 15 months. And so Judah got up and walked around with him and played with him. And when we returned to England, Judah started creeping again. And we're like, this is not right. So we know there was something wrong. We started speech therapy because my wife at the time said, you know what? He's not talking to me. He doesn't interact with me. And he doesn't engage children. He will just engage only in parallel play. And he's in his own little world, but he's next to the other kid. He's not quite interacting with them, but he's playing like the kid is playing. So those were some issues for us. And so August 9th turned around. I was 35 years old. My wife was 32 at the time of Judah's birth. Judah was born prematurely at 31 weeks, and he came out at 2 pounds, 15 ounces. And oh, by the way, my brother has autism, and I also have a cousin who has a son with severe autism. So there is some family history there in terms of that. Sometimes I wonder if my wife and I are on the spectrum. I don't think either of us have had the courage to actually go and get tested. When we were PCS, or PCS is a change of permanent station. We were sent from England to Alaska. And Alaska, as you know, have very few services. In the whole state, there was just one developmental developmental pediatrician. And therefore, we took Judah to that individual to be evaluated. And Judah, the pediatrician, came back after evaluated him and said, you know what, he does have autism. He seems to be very high functioning, so some of the signs are not readily apparent. And so we decided to engage that diagnosis. Now, the engagement of this diagnosis was a difficult one because I don't know about other parents, but for me, and I would imagine it's similar, that most parents, the hope of their future is tied up in their firstborn. There's just something about your firstborn where everything is just, it's filled with optimism and looming dreams for your child. And so when I got the diagnosis of autism, I went into a state of mild depression. And so I threw myself a pity party that lasted for about 5 days. It was a loss of dream for me. The wonderment of the severity of his autism is a thing that struck me. Oh my God, will he be able to talk? Will he be able to do this? Or will he live independently? And all these questions just come forth like a cascading thunder of water that just overwhelms you. And then there's the self-recrimination that happens because of it. You know, what did I do wrong? Could I have done something better? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My suggestion would be in this regard. I had to abort my party at day 5 because I realized I needed to place my priority above my pain. And so this is the thing I would encourage parents who have had a new diagnosis of autism. Try to place your priority above your pain. And what is your priority? Of course, your child. And so the journey begins. So what do I do next? I said, shut down the pity party, get over myself. Sometimes it's an ego thing. Sometimes it's a loss of dream thing. Whatever the struggle that you may face, you have to get over it and focus on your child. Get your child the help he or she needs. Become acquainted with the inner beauty of your child. In each child with autism, there is a beauty that lies there that you must look deeper than yourself in order to discover. And that is the challenge of every parent, and start to invest in that beauty that you see and nurture and grow it. Play to his or her strength. I recall Judah loved cookies like his father. And once upon a time he kept getting into the cookies. And we're like, oh my God, how did he do that? He found them in the drawer. We put them on the counter. He was on top of the counter. So we decided to put them on the refrigerator. And lo and behold, I left the room and came back one day and Judah was on top of the refrigerator. And we were like, how did he make it up there? There was no sign that he used the ladder. There was no sign that he was on the refrigerator. And so I realized one of his strengths is his athletic ability. And that's something that we played to early on. What do you do next? Educate yourself about autism and what can be done to help that child in this particular situation. And there's so much brochure and literature, and the internet is littered with just bales and bales of information. Make sure that the source that you utilize is a reputable source. That would be my only thing, because Dr. Kraus talked about the level of quackery and snake oil medicines that are out there that in some instances can do more harm than good. So how do you play to your child's strength? One of the more powerful things that we discovered with our child is to tell them that they can ask for help at any time. That is such a powerful tool. And we kept verbalizing that to Judah. Judah, if you need help, come ask Daddy. Or we go and consult him. His mother would say, do you need help, buddy, or are you good on your own? And he's an independent spirit, and he would say, I'm good, or I need help. This is so powerful because every time he asks for help, it gives insight to what his thinking is at the time. And so eliciting that help question also allows him to start to share with his parents and with people around him what's going on within his inner world. Get them in a team or individual sport. Dr. Kraus talked about the leading cause of that being drowning, and that was one of the things that I noted right away. So we had Judah in swimming lessons early on, and when his brother was born, we put him in there too, and they both learned how to swim at a very early age. And this is something I would definitely advise all parents to do. I also say introduce an instrument and music and stuff like that for brain, which will aid with other areas of brain development. You know, the earlier the service that's instituted, the better the child does long term, because the brain has this thing we call plasticity. And basically, it's its ability to form new memories and synapse and learning abilities as the brain is exposed to developmental issues that will aid in neural development and learning. And so we introduced Judah first to the violin. He didn't like that. The drums, he didn't like that. Finally, he settled on the trumpet, and he taught himself how to play the trumpet, and he now plays in the jazz band. One of the things you have to play to the strength is realize that kids can be cruel to each other. So in the school system, there are bullies and hecklers, et cetera, and he was called every name in the book. And the thing is, when you're one of the only African-American and or brown or black kid in a school, you become a target by virtue of your color. And this is something you have to teach your kid to deal with as things go on. And, you know, fortifying them with a sense of who they are, where they come from, and map their course in terms of where they're going is so very important to that kid who can definitely understand those things. Teach them how to deal with insult and how to walk away, or else anger and learning how to fight becomes a thing. Speaking of fighting, we did put Judah in karate, and so he advanced to a red belt in karate, so he knew how to defend himself. The other thing you have to do is become an advocate for your child by becoming, by building relationships with teachers and providers. Advise the team on how best to appeal to the child's interest and what kind of learner your child is. That helps the teacher to approach them in a certain way. Well, have parent-teacher conferences and tell them, hey, what works best for him at home is this. And by just doing that alone, the teacher will begin to understand how to approach him, as opposed to just creating a cookie-cutter approach to your child. Remember, autism is a spectrum disorder. Therefore, you can have so many other traits within that boiling pot of that diagnosis that each child is an individual and must be treated that way. And those approaches has to be verbalized in order to be accessed. Don't allow the stigmatization of a behavior to become the thing that puts your child at a disadvantage. That is going hand in hand with being an advocate for your child. What do I mean by that? When Judah was younger, he had this habit of humping the floor. Well, you can imagine that precipitated a parent-teacher conference on what the heck is going on in my household. But this was just a behavior he found to be comforting. And we had to really weigh in on that and try to not just change the behavior, but try to offer an alternative behavior so that Judah can become engaged in that and it doesn't become too distracting for his learning environment. So that was one of those things that we needed to learn. One of the things Judah would do is when he's happy, he would jump and flap his hand. And then I realized, like, my brother did that as a kid. Like, wow, look at the same behavior being replicated here. And that is something that we had to deal with and provide a more workable alternative for the learning environment, not necessarily just to bluntly change your behavior. Fight the good fight. What do I mean by that? So, as Dr. Kraus alluded to, schools in the educational system, schools become the basis the base for treatment plans. And therefore, if you're in the educational system, you'll normally go to your school and tell them, hey, my child has a diagnosis of autism. He will need to access services within the school system, whether it be speech, whether it be PT, OT, those kinds of things. And so the process begins. But the IEP, or Individual Educational Plan, or 504, usually becomes this huge fight. It's not so much because, well, in my perception, it's not so much because that they don't want to do what needs to be done. It's just that sometimes they're super overwhelmed with cases, and it's difficult for them to partition their time any further. And so it becomes an issue. Well, you can fight the good fight by being at the table, putting forth the meetings, showing up for the meetings, and not only just show up, but be prepared to verbalize what the goals are for your child. I recall when I went to a meeting and I was very frustrated because it was really hard to access this particular service. And so I'm sitting down with the two teachers, and their first question to me, well, Mr. Christian, how do you feel about this whole stuff? Well, I said to them right away, it's not so much how I feel, but it's what my goals are for my child. And I jumped right into verbalizing what those are. And they were kind of blown away that, okay, this guy he's on it. He knows what he wants. He's here to be at the table. Not only that, but he's volunteering to come and sit and be with the child, et cetera, throughout this whole process. And my wife and I at the time were very engaged in this whole process. And so autism, a testimony. Back in, forgive me if I get this date wrong, but back in 1996, I think it was, Hillary Clinton came out with a book that says it takes a village. Well, for autism, it really takes a village. It truly takes a village. Understand that in medicine, the word syndrome or spectrum are issues that are difficult to manage, just inherently difficult to manage. And sometimes the symptoms that your child has does not fit the symptoms that some people say it should be. In medicine, we call that the child or the patient not reading the book. And so in autism, there are a lot of children who haven't quite read the book that we wrote. But now that the literature is expansive and becoming more and more, there are more of these symptoms that are contained in the quote unquote book. So it does take a village. And for Judah's village, it took PT and OT and family members, frankly. Judah is fortunate to be the godson of David Hodge. His aunt happens to be a med-peds physician, and his father, of course, a family physician. But there were so many people in our village, and his village was quite expansive. His grandmother was an elementary school teacher that taught him how to read early. So this village for Judah was very engaged and very motivated to help him. And the part that really needed to happen as he aged and got older was the social therapy that the system has built in. When you deal with autism and your village starts to become more expansive, then you realize that you're not alone. Autism is not a new thing. It's been around for hundreds of years. More and more we're recognizing the symptoms, and there are many people who have reached celebrity status and accumulated massive amounts of wealth that are now autistic. Elon Musk, Dan Aykroyd, Albert Einstein, Daryl Hannah, Anthony Hopkins, one of my favorite actors, by the way, Tim Burton, Charles Darwin, Emily Dickens, Bill Gates, Michelangelo, Sir Isaac Newton, Tesla, Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Carl Jung, Jane Austen, Charles Schultz, my favorite personally. I was a big Peanut fan back in the day. And so Judah's village take on a whole new meaning with the birth of his sister. And sisters can be even more cruel than the school system bullies that you may encounter. And Judah's village expand to a little girl called Catalina. And if you know Catalina or have met Catalina, She's an effusive personality with her own mind and goals, and she challenges Judah at every turn. And the relationship has forced Judah into corridors of development that I think he would not have accessed were she not on the scene. And so it's really a joy and a home disruption at times to see them interact. But she has become a major part of his village. Educate yourself. Know the law.
Excuse me, Dr.
Dr. Bishop, your state, 1986, the amendment to the Education for All Disability, for All Children with Disability Act mandates that the state provides for certain. Yes.
As well, how much longer do you have? Because we have to get the others, because of the time disruption, we have to get Mr. Green and Sister Green in as quick as possible. But the other things you have to say, you could put them in the Q&A. You could respond to them in the Q&A section. Depends how they are, because this is absolutely rich for me.
Awesome.
Is that good? Is this a
awesome.
good? Is this a good time to pause? And
so yes.
Okay. Okay,
absolutely.
So
we can do that.
Okay, let's pause now, and when in the Q&A, Dr. Christian could finish and respond to those things, because this is very rich and important stuff. But I want to get Mr. Green and Mrs. Green in to give their testimony. So Jonathan's going to read their bio, and then we're going to come back. So Dr. Christian, don't forget where you are, and we'll get back to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry about that. H. Lee Green, a seasoned professional passionate about urban innovation and community development. Currently the Director of Transit Revenue Reporting at Intersection Media, LLC. He wields data analysis, technology integration, and effective communication to shape smart cities. Beyond his role at Intersection Media, H. Lee Green's influence extends at the executive director of Faith CDC. Here he spearheads impactful community development and educational empowerment initiatives. Under the strategic leadership, Faith CDC has achieved remarkable feats through its 501c3 initiatives, including the Community Development Training Initiative, collaborating with parents such as the CT Housing Finance Authority and the Federal Home Loan Bank, SFBOS. With an academic background in psychology and educational technology, holding a BS from the University of Bridgeton and a MED from Temple University, Lee combines analytical prowess with understanding of human behavior and technology.
Well, thank you. Is there?
I'm sorry. Wait, I'm sorry.
Hold on.
Do the other one as well. Do Miss Green as well. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna need to read this for her in a way of her saying it. Sorry. My name is Leslie Davis Green, and by profession I am an elementary school teacher, K6. Just a little bit about my background. I attend the University of Bridgeport for my Bachelor of Science degree in General Studies with a concentration in Social Sciences and Master's in Elementary Education at K through 6. Professionally, I have been a parent trainer for Bridgeport Parent Center, a sister agency of the Bridgeport BOE, spearheading families of immigrants in preparing their children in entering the public school system, educational instructor, and head teacher for 6-6 inter-district magnet school in Bridgeport, CT, and Camel Academy in Greenwich. CT, I was trained by a master glassblower in scientific glass at Vitro Technology Ltd. in Norwalk, CT, as an underwriting associate at Oxford Health Plans. I created a flex plan that allowed parents to achieve a family and work lifestyle balances with flexible hours and allowed time with their family while fulfilling their obligations to the company. I was also an independent contractor for DMR, now DSS, speaking at workshops throughout the state of Connecticut on bridging the divide between staff and families, and currently an entrepreneur and co-founder of S3 STEM, the STEM group, creating and developing a program for grades 4 through 6 and building robots for rescue missions in water out of Lego other parts. I am proficient and have created databases and platforms using Oracle, HubSpot, CRM, Excel, Google, Microsoft in domestic and international Fortune 500 companies. I have worked as a receptionist, administrative assistant, and executive assistant as well.
Well, who's going to go first?
Okay. Thank you very much. And you, okay. We always do this. She'll get used to us.
We're a tag team. We got a lot of jokes, but we want to thank you. I'll go first.
Okay.
We want to thank you for this space and everything that we've heard from Dr. Christian, from Dr. Kraus. We have a daughter who is 29. Okay, 29, and she's our second child, and she was born in 94. And all of the things that we've heard thus far is spot on. The only thing that I would want to add is that we've been talking about early intervention. We've been talking about the younger children. We've been talking about how do we move them through the system. But we've got a child that's 29, and it is a vastly different world on the other side. From the presentation, we did not know the mortality rate was 39. That's one of those jaw droppers, like when you first heard you had an autistic child. That's shocking, because our child does have seizures. She is on the spectrum midway, and she has speech problems. So there is grandma seizure. She had a seizure so bad one time, she rolled out of the bed, which did not have carpet on the floor. Her body was positioned by the door so we couldn't get the door in, and she's banging her face on the floor. And of course, she had to go to the hospital. But without speech, you can't leave your child behind. Because again, you have the whole bioethics issues, and she's a female. And we all know that females don't get a fair shot with the doctor. But the questions and the thoughts and the ideas is challenging. And you're absolutely right that you have to catch yourself and say, it's about the child, not about you. But in reality, you have a child that's 29 years old, but you cannot take the eye off of her. And she's home today because the staff was short and she couldn't go to the program. And she had all of those anxiety issues this morning, in your face, wants this, wants that, and you've got a job to do. The mental health is not just on the child, but it's also on the parent. And so services really need to be expanded. And it's ironic for me as a father to take my child in to get her DEPA shots so that she doesn't have her menstrual cycle. The nurse looks at me peculiar and say, you know what you're talking about? Especially being an African-American man. Everything that we heard today, all I can say is ditto. We've been there, we've done it, we've seen it all. We didn't get her into the program until she came home off the bus in 8th grade with some sort of scar on her face. And so it had to come out of public school and go into a special school. But if you don't have the dollars and a lawyer, your IEPs will look like nothing. Les?
Okay. Hi, thank you, everyone. Dr. Christian, Dr. Kraus, you stole my life. I just
we would love to go to Chicago, though.
Definitely would like to speak with you at another time on a sidebar. For me, we again, our daughter was born in 1994. She has an older sister. She's the second of 3 girls. Her youngest sister, Dr. Christian, was like, you know, you're saying about your daughter, her younger sister brings her to another level that it's like, it's good to see. Because one of the things, you know, my father, you know, God rest his soul, used to say when Jody was just a little girl, he's like, that girl knows exactly what she's doing. And then we had come to find out that she is apraxic, which means she understands everything, but she cannot verbalize it. I had suspected that at the age of 2 weeks, again, because she was our second, I actually approached the pediatrician because she was in for her next set of shots, that something is just different. Whereas her older sister, I nursed all my children, and her older sister got very used to my touch, probably within 24 hours of bringing her home from the hospital. She got used to it at the hospital, and she wouldn't flinch, because newborns flinch when you touch them because they don't understand the external thing that's going on with them. But human babies catch on very quick. Whereas Jody, she was still flinching the first week. And I was like, why is she flinching when I touch her? I you know, approach my babies very gently. I talk softly when I come in so they know I'm coming. But she didn't seem to have an interest of me being there. And I did similar things that I did with her sister. I put her in the hub of the house where I'm moving around and there's stimulus, and she was in her own world. Upon speaking to her pediatrician about it, his response to me was that, well, you know, you're a mother, you have 2 young daughters, and you're in corporate. It's you. You're overwhelmed. She's fine. And then I'm starting to think, I'm losing my marbles. I have 2, you know, young children in diapers. It's me. But then within less than 30 days, I was like, no, something's going on with this kid. And I demanded that the pediatrician, because at the time I was working as an underwriter at Oxford, and education of the parents is crucial, of the families. And so I knew that referrals were something you asked for, but the doctors can legally not deny you a referral for your child. And so I went into the pediatricians with the authority that, okay, thank you for your opinion, but I know that she needs to be assessed. Something's going on. And as Lee explained to you, she is home unexpectedly today. She may make a cameo. I just heard her coming down the, yeah, here she is.
Looking for her crackers, not the cookies. But she liked the cookies from McDonald's too. But
well,
we're around.
We did the cookies to where we were. I taught her how to bake cookies. That kept her going, and she liked it and she enjoyed it. She's also a member of Special Olympics, got her into that sports.
Yeah.
When she was 8 years old, she's been doing it since she was 8 years old. She does the track and field in the summer. She does the bowling in the fall. We tried golf, wasn't her thing. She loves mini golf, but once you hit the ball, you got to go out there and walk for it. She was like, no, she actually got into a golf cart and just started to drive out. And one of the rules is that the participants, the athletes, have to walk. They couldn't ride the golf cart. She was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So, you know, that was something, you know, we again, and we just tried different things. For swimming, I had swimming written to her curriculum when she was in kindergarten, into her school curriculum. I did flex time at Oxford. I approached and offered it to my director because she was going to birth to 3 once a week. She was doing so well. They said, listen, if she could come twice a week. So I was running back and forth between the office, daycare to go get her, run over to birth to 3 and work with her, because I said, I've got to be the one to see it, because otherwise I don't know how to take that bridge into her life at home and in the community. I understand I was very privileged to be able to do that. A lot of support family, church. We had a huge amount, even though they were like, we don't know what to do with this, that everybody was engaged anyway where they could be. Since it got to a level where they're like, if she could come every day, and I said, done. And I, said to my manager, I got to find something in the evening. And she's like, I think McDonald's is open. The director said, well, no, she's got to, we want her here. See if she can do an offer. So I did an offer for flex time. The DMR, which is now DSS and DDS, offered me a contracting job to speak to their staff who do just like we do, sit around the table, talk about what's happening, just to bring down the temperature between staff and families, because it can be intimidating. At the time, again, she was born in 94, so in 96, we didn't have digital. We had the trifold of guidelines and the laws. And my first meeting, I had highlighted exactly what she was entitled to, and I read from it. I never looked up. And like you, Dr. Christian, they're like, oh, okay, wait a minute. She knows a little bit about what she's doing here. And like you, Dr. Kraus, the principal in her kindergarten class said, your daughter's getting more services than anybody else in this town. I just want you to know. And I said, okay, thank you. You want a cookie? I mean, I was like, what is it that you want me to, say? I also didn't wait for the standard allotted time that the schools push you to the maximum of where they can respond, which I think was 60 days or 90 days. School year's over. So when I would go into those IEPs, we didn't leave those IEPs until I said, okay, we're going to meet in 30 days and see how things are going. If we need to change anything, we're going to catch up. And so I went into these workshops instructing parents and sharing with them, and then ended up going to theirs. Listen, we can't come as enemies with one another, because teachers are already nervous. I'm also an elementary school teacher. The unspoken word is that we cannot identify children with special needs because the school doesn't have the funding. There, I said it.
Well, that's really comes down to the dollar and cents.
It's the funding.
It's the money.
It's the money, but you can get almost everything written into the school curriculum for your child, because they took the PE teacher who was also a lifeguard for her classes on swimming. So she knows how to swim. There is always avenues. And I tell you, like you, Dr. Kraus, I would walk into any of the buildings, whether it was the Board of Ed or any of the schools that she was in or her older sister, and they would roll their eyes. Oh my God, she's back. I'm coming in just to peek in. Oh, well, did you call us and let us know? Oh, no, I don't have to by law, as long as you have my child on your property and you're responsible for him. I'm not going to interrupt the class. I'm just going to peek in. And with that, I had found you can wear red. You want to wear red?
No.
He wants you to wear red.
Right. She's
Okay.
got a little high anxiety.
She's home, and
everything's got to be in a certain place.
And he left his shirt out on the living room.
So yes.
So she, we've gone through a process with her that, as my husband was stating, once you get to a certain age, services are more difficult, and even everyday things. She loves swinging. She loves the swings, tire swings. It does. She absolutely loves them. We have a pool in the backyard, always have for our kids. It's difficult to find a playground for swings.
Well, then on top of that,
adults.
She has seizures, so she's taking medications that's changing her dynamics, so she's got weight. I've got to build her own bed, because any other bed, it'll be broken. There's so many different things that the parent has to go through.
Right. She bounces on the bed, so it's a toy. She loves the bed. She loves mattresses, so she's like, wee. And of course, it can only take so much of that happening.
And
so he built the bed.
Yeah, with chairs, any chair. I mean, we broke plenty, man. Listen, the house, it's just the way it is.
Well, what we discovered with her is we use office chairs. Yeah. We go to Staples, office chairs, perfect. And so the constant adjustment that has to be made for a person with autism is real. But, again, parents have the law is on their side.
And one thing I would say, as a testimony, and I'm glad that I have my wife, Leslie, because she was the one who was there. I went out, I went to New York, I was making it. She stayed home with the child. And I'm now seeing some of those things that, since I'm now remote and she's a little bit older, but the most important is inclusion. Don't leave the child at home. If you go into the store, take her to the store. And if somebody looks at you strange, you look at them strange. But inclusion, and the most important, I think, I'm very thankful to God that we found a church that didn't tell us to take the child to the quiet room and allowed her to be free in service and go up on the pulpit.
She go up on
go
the
up
altar to
in
pastor.
anywhere and do anything. And to be able to make noise in the middle of a sermon, and I don't have to say, shh, be quiet.
Right. And most
because that, I think, gives them the sense of community.
Right. And if you to tell them to be quiet gives them the sense that there's something wrong with them. And most of her, it was babbling or it was singing. And if you listen, she was actually singing a church song. She praise dances. She loves to praise dance. Our church put on a huge production. They still do it, called the Ma'afa, Kiswahili, for the great calamity of how Black people were brought over to this land that we now call home. She loved it. She was always at rehearsals with me. So she, and all the babies were, because it was from babies from the slave ship. And before the slave ship, it was showing the kings and queens in Africa from the slave ship to here in this country. And in the 10th year anniversary, she actually participated. And so giving her, not too sure of how much she takes in, but I accept that she's getting what she's supposed to get, and it is our job to get her exposed.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Let me tell you, y'all have me all messed up here today. First is the technology issues, and I'm pushing the envelope now because I already spoke to Dr. Sneed to kind of move it back a little bit. I have Dr. Kraus on here, and his schedule is vigorous, and so is just agreeing Miss Green and Dr. Christian. So what I want to do now is I want to try to bring this to a close, so we can move on to the next session. But I do want to give you an opportunity, each person. Can anyone go on? Can anyone mute their microphone because I'm getting a feedback? Perfect. Okay. So I do want to give everyone an opportunity to say some things that they haven't said, but I do want to make a couple of comments. One is, when I was working my master's in education back in 1988, and autism was mentioned, Dr. Kraus, under the mental retardation section of our textbook, and it was a paragraph. What I was thinking about both you and Dr. Christian were mentioning that it's not new, but early on, there was so little information, and now we have so much information, and we have much more information. And one of the things that Dr. Christian said, that yes, his two sons are my godsons. One, Gabriel, and he didn't mention, but it was on his. I just got the cover slide, Dixon. I didn't get the full, but it mentioned Judah and Gabriel. So I just want to make a little comment, because when you talk about a village, there's an education we have to do to a village, it seems to me. And I knew about Judah, was the oldest son, but I didn't know that Gabriel was on the spectrum. I had no idea. So I was babysitting them. Actually, that's not even a good word, but I was taking care of them. I had them for a day or two. So I took them to McDonald's, and Gabriel, I'm like, I think it was, I forgot what it was, but like a sausage McMuffin that had cheese on it that he didn't want cheese or whatever. Well, take off the cheese. No, Uncle David, I can't take off the cheese. I said, what's wrong with you? Take off the cheese. And so I had to go buy another one. So I ate that one. But what I'm saying, but it wasn't until that personal experience. So you said, if you said it's the minutia of details that we have to educate the village to see, because something that Dr. Kraus, something that you said absolutely terrified me. I mean, absolutely terrifies me, because our public, our police force And I wish Dr. Lockton forward, I think I could, after coming to the end, if I could elevate, if he could mention something that is powerful. That is in, I need to get it right, but I think it's Denver, where his daughter lives. She's a social worker who rides along with police officers on particular calls so that she could be the buffer between the police officer and the mental health person, because too often we lose person going through crises because the police don't know how to deal with that person. And what they may take may be an aggressive move, as we just saw and understand from Brother and Sister Green, that not an aggressive move, it's a human move. And so, but they need to be educated on it. So it's terrifying on both ends of the legal system, because something Sister Green said, she said that my child is different, not wrong. That's powerful, because when you say wrong and right is a moral issue. When you say different is a human issue, right? to say that my child is different, well, darling, every one of us different, is just different in what way, or how far. And when we make it, we say that, well, your child is acting wrong. No, he's not acting wrong. She's not acting wrong. She's being himself or herself. So the language then has to be changed and massaged in such a way that we could be helpful. But so now the question I have for everybody to kind of close out this set before we move to Dr. Sneed, who we helping us with lupus. The question I want each and everyone to consider: know this, that we don't have to rush this conversation, because this is the beginning, not the end. One of the things that Dr. Kathleen McDuffie, Dr. Lachlan Foro, Dr. Wiggins Earl, Miss Lily Head, when we got together a year and a half ago, maybe, to work on last year's PHI, but we had some disruptions, but we getting it together, is that whatever we do the following year, that's all we're going to do. So Sister Green, Brother Green, you're going to hear from us again. Dr. Kraus, we're going to beg for you again. Dr. Christian, you're going to hear from us again, because we need to elongate these conversations, not in this kind of fashion. This is just giving us a little taste, so that in a quarterly session, you get a chance to examine and deal with these things. Because like I said, I put it in the chat, I'm very terrified about police interrogation of person who are autism, and that person is answering one question when the police is asking a different question, but the police don't realize that they're answering a different question from what they're asking, and then that becomes a problem. So therefore, here's a question for you, and I need you to give me an assignment. Lachlan is not on, but here's what he would say. He would say, what do you see in your best version of the world for your child, or for Dr. Kraus in your field? What do you see for your best version of the world in 10 years? Where would you like the world to be with respect to autism? And once you answer that, then you will help us, because by the way, this is going to be posted on YouTube. So many, whatever you want to say that will help other people access it, give us the keywords, so when people Google, they'll be able to find this. What is that thing that you, what can we do to be helpful in the National Center for Bioethics? Sister Green mentioned the word bioethics because she realizes that fundamentally this is a bioethical issue, because it raises questions about how we treat the least, the lost, and the left out, and those persons who exhaust. So I would like to so Dr. Kraus, if you could go first, I'll appreciate it, and just tell us, what can we do? What ought we be doing? What should be on our agenda? What should be our most major focus, so that in 10 years from now, when we have this conversation, when I invite you back, Dr. Kraus, 10 years from now, you say, okay, they hit the nail on the head. They're actually doing this. Dr. Kraus.
I think on a couple levels, I think schools need to be more open in regards to intervention, and get the funding so that they can provide the interventions that are truly necessary. We need more effort to integrate the kids into the community in a way, just like church, they can be welcomed and feel part of that community and feel safe. You brought up the police. It's a huge issue. There are tutorials that are done in Chicago for many of the police. And, you hear a lot of negative things, but there are also a lot of positive things that go on. And there's been huge interest in kind of how to approach. A number of years ago, an autistic child was shot and killed with a butter knife in his hand. and it was terrible. And but since that time, there's really been a shift in promoting greater understanding. And you know, for myself, there has to be greater understanding. There has to be greater community support. And just one more thing, there has to be more to help the adult community as kids transition. There's just not enough out there to help them.
Thank you. Mr. Lee, brother, Mr. Lee, Mrs. Lee. Sorry, Mrs. Green. Mr. Green, Mrs. Green. All right, Brother Green, Sister Green. There you go.
I would like to see some sort of housing, some sort of transitional housing. I mean, there is programs out there. There's either group homes or companion homes. Companion homes is something new that they're doing, where a individual in the community will go through some sort of certification and bring these children or these adults into their home, and that will be their placement. But as we get older, as we get through another COVID, what do you do if we're taking care of these children, these adults, and there's no services out there? We're not here forever. And it's not fair for them to be put into that situation when there's a tragic moment. So I'm hoping that the housing would be resolved. And to that point, when we build these communities, they should be built with that caveat that 20% of the space is for these special needs with the services that's required. That's it.
You know, I want to make mention that one of the things that Ms. Lily has been advocating, and therefore, if she's advocating it, I'm working on the advocacy, and that is there is no. Mr. Green, Sister Green, do y'all live in Tuskegee?
No.
No, we live in Connecticut, Trumbull, Connecticut.
Okay. As you may know, that there is no major healthcare facility, although there was with the VA, but there's not now. And so if a person has any major trauma, including giving birth to a child, then they're in a serious situation. I mean, a heart attack could be a death attack, because if the ambulance has to come from Auburn and East Alabama Hospital, that's 20, 30 minutes. And then to get to deal with them, put them on, and take them 20, 30 minutes. When I had a crisis about 2 months ago, the ambulance was at my house in 5 minutes, and it took them 5 minutes to get to a hospital, which is 8 minutes away. So, but when you live in the rural areas and rural communities, the stuff that you're mentioning, there's a massive limitation. And so now that puts vulnerable populations into another level of crisis. Now, so having said that, I'm going to, before Dr. Christian goes, I'm going to have Jonathan read the question that's in the queue. And Dr. Christian or Dr. Kraus can answer that question. And then Dr. Christian, you will have the final word. Okay? The question, Jonathan, read the question that's in the Q&A, please.
From Tammy Henderson, what neurological and life course studies are being done with children, youth, and adults who are diagnosed with autism?
Dr. Kraus?
Of course, I hear that question, and I'll be frank, I just drew a complete blank on any studies I can think of. There are a lot of studies that are done. There are a number out of Yale, in regards to, for example, if the kids don't have eye contact, what part of the face do they look at? What is it that might be different in regards to the eye contact? I think that the major work that's being done right now is really genetics, and trying to understand the incredibly complex genetics of autism, the overlapping with other disorders, because sometimes, and the way they figure it out is looking at these other disorders, seeing where those disorders lie on the genes, and then they can find a connection with autism. I can't sort of throw out off the top of my head, though, these specific studies. But I think that if you simply look up genetics and autism, actually at University of Illinois in Chicago is a major international geneticist, Dr. Edwin Cook, Coke. But I can't give you the specific studies per se.
Thank you, Dr. Christian.
In terms of specific studies, I can't name one off the top of my head when it comes to the neurology of autism. However, I would, in one of my research, there's a major funding that happened in 2022, where 9 particular centers were granted a huge amount of money, upwards of $100 million. And these by NIH to basically study a particular sector of autism itself. And these research centers are located in major universities that have these problems. I cannot recall which one in particular is doing neurological studies at this point, but it's easily something you can look up on the internet. And I apologize, I've had so much technical issues. I'm almost afraid to leave this screen and go somewhere else, dealing with my Mac.
No, we have time next year to get to it, so you're fine. But yeah, so you can just give your last words then.
One of those universities is engaged in order to study neurological issue, and it's a quick Google search. In terms of what I would like to see in terms of autism, as the word gets out there that this is a real thing and that the rates are going up and up and up, then sooner or later, we're going to have to put more resources into it. And one of the things I would like to see happen is that we come up with a kit of some sort. Okay, when you're diagnosed, what's the next step? And let it be a step that dictates or has a dichotomy where on one arm of that algorithm is if you're in school, you can engage the school, etc. If you're not in school, if you're being homeschooled, etc., you go this particular route. Because personally, I have no experience in how to access care for a homeschool or non-traditional student when it comes to accessing care for those individuals. In issues of, let's say, migrant workers, there should be something that deals with that. When it comes to independent living later on, wills where you set up the name eludes me right now, but where you set up a trust for your child with autism, a disability trust, where finances are partitioned in a certain way for them to inherit. These are some of the things that we have to prepare for, because that child will age out of the traditional avenues of care as they get older. Like right now, Judah is in college. He's about to be a senior this year in college. And where do I go from there with that? Well, being a financial planner, I have actually set some of those things in motion for him. And so other people have to deal with that. How do we tackle the increased costs of having a child with autism? That needs to be addressed also, which was part of my lower slides. But the thing is that as we go, rates are getting higher. We need a stereotypical way to do that. And I know it's a spectrum disorder, and that's inherently difficult at this stage of the game.
Thank you so much. Dr. Farwell put it in the question, the mention, the program that I mentioned. So we'll bring this down to a close. Thank you, Dr. Christian. Thank you, Dr. Kraus. He had to go. Thank you, Sister Green, Brother Green. I want to say this. How can I say this nicely? Dr. Christian, you should have stopped while you were ahead, because you just made it even worse. Because what just hit me is obviously Brother Green and Sister Green are educated persons, and obviously medical doctor, and obviously I would be afraid to go up against Mrs. Green in the dark alley unless she's on my side, because she just looks like she's not going to stop. She's going to be relentless until she gets you down, right? Exactly, yeah, clap, right? But Mr. Green knows his place. But here's the thing. What you just put on my table, because these are matters that Dr. Earl cautioned us yesterday that we shouldn't be we shouldn't see ourselves as being messianic, but the Messiah, the Christ for everybody. But at the same time, if something's on our table, we need to address it. And here's what's on my table. If the number is, what is it, 1 in 44 and 1 in 100 or something like that Dr. Kraus put out as autistic.
The rate is now up to 1 in 36,
actually. Okay, 1 in 36. So then what terrifies me is not so much the daughters of Mr. Green than the sons of Dr. Christian. What terrifies me is the sons of daughters of Mr. Rivera and Mrs. Gonzalez, and basically in the migrant communities, especially down on the border. Could you imagine the vulnerability now? They're all vulnerable. And you put up, you're talking about this wall, and okay, but that's a politics, and that's none of my business, quite frankly, as a bioethicist. As a bioethicist, I am concerned about those on the border, not just the ones who we're seeing not getting water or food, but how are they dealing with those who have mental health problems or issues, or how do you deal with those on the spectrum, and where we already have little answers. Like you were saying, Brother Sister Green, about finding them communities of homes and such. They're on the border, they're sitting at the base of a wall, and they have to be placed in a position where they could get their red sweater or not, or the red sweater should be elsewhere. And if you don't understand their situation, you will terrorize them. And if you, there's a sad story I could tell, I'm not going to say because we're all in a nice little flow, but if we do not do better in educating ourselves, I'm terrified for the least, the lost, and the left out, for those who lack advocacy, because these people will be mistreated, and they're human beings. They're absolutely, let's stop right here because it's going to get me a little upset. So let me stop. So thank you very much, Brother Green, Sister Green, Dr. Kraus, and Dr. Christian. Now we shall segue into lupus, and feel free to stay on board, and we'll segue into a final conversation in PHEI, and that is lupus. And interestingly enough, we have the same kinds of numbers, Dr. Christian, in terms of like, how the heck did Black people lead in this too? Right? How do you lead in autism? What water are we drinking that other people are not drinking? You kind of understood why we let it lead in diabetes. It's kind of clear. Dr. Sneed, you could come online now. But it's kind of clear why we might lead in diabetes or hypertension, because we eat that pig feed, that fat back. So our diet, we live in deserts, food deserts, we live in health deserts and all this kind of thing. So we understand environmentally and politically how we could be the recipients of certain kinds of diseases. But lupus and dementia, this is something totally different, but it's part of that conversation, that lupus and dementia and other kinds of things are supposed to be major. So